Welcome to Pick a Card, Any Card,
where we pick a card
any card,
and cast it without paying its mana cost.
I'm Andrew.
And I'm Devin.
Today's cards are Phyrexian Unlife
and Springjack Shepard.
So today I'm going to talk about Phyrexian Unlife. Phyrexian Unlife is a 3-mana enchantment, 2 generic and 1 white. You don't lose the game for having 0 or less life. As long as you have 0 or less life, all damage is dealt to you as though the source had infect. Phyrexian Unlife does not have any flavor text.
Which is unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, because I think it could have greatly added
especially
to the flavor.
with that art. Just like, what is going on exactly? I want to know.
So, the art is a picture of a Mirren who has just been completed. They've gone through the entire process of going from a flesh and blood creature to a Phyrexian machine. The picture depicts a humanoid in a porcelain mask with Phyrexian oil or ichor. And there's this look of absolute horror on this creature's face, despite the fact that the mask is porcelain and there's no mutable form to the face.
The face itself is incredibly neutral because it's a porcelain mask, but
yes,
it's all in the eyes and like the fact that like it's crying with the oil.
Ichor.
Yeah, and it's presumed that the face underneath is not having a good day.
If there is a face underneath.
Yeah, that's true.
After you've been completed, there's little to no flesh left. So the ability also, I think, really, really emphasizes this. You have gone through the process. You have been completed.
Yeah.
Because you no longer lose for having 0 life.
That's because you're not a life anymore.
Yeah,
you don't have
no longer
life.
You still lose for having 10 poison counters.
Yeah.
But
because you've essentially withered away.
Yes. And I think just this ability really reflects the flavor behind this card, and this card is so flavorful. It's from the new Phyrexia set from the Scars of Mirrodin block. And what has happened in this block is, or the sort of story that has progressed in this block is, Karn returned to the plane that he created, Mirrodin. And when he came back, he brought with him unknowingly some of this glistening oil.
Yeah.
And this oil began to spread and corrupt the plane. And then the Phyrexians invaded. Mm-hmm. Phyrexia was their home plane. It was lost or destroyed. I don't remember which. And so they're out to recreate it. And they set their sights on Mirrodin because it most closely resembles their home plane. It's all mechanical. It's completely artificial, as they are.
Yeah.
So they began this war. They set up shop on Mirrodin, and they began converting Mirians into Phyrexians through this process. Mm-hmm. And what's new about this is the Phyrexians have now started using mana of all the colors instead of just black. Originally, the Phyrexians only used black mana. Now they've branched out into all the colors, and as such, they've become factioned. So you have a faction for each color now.
I actually did not. I don't know anything about the Phyrexian stuff. Like, I tried looking it up, but I know the Phyrexis stems back all the way.
Phyresis. That's the process by which they take someone and convert them into a Phyrexian.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. I do know what little I did read up. It goes all the way back to Urza.
Yes.
Which, that's
Urza
made Karn. So
yes.
Karn is a pivotal character in the Phyresis story.
Yeah.
On Mirrodin at least.
Originally, Phyrexia overlaid their plane on Dominaria, which was where Urza was from, as we mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah.
So, Phyrexia has set their sights on Mirrodin and branched out into all 5 colors of mana.
Oh, yeah. I actually didn't know they were... It makes sense that they were originally just black, but...
Yeah. So, the Phyrexians have branched out into all 5 colors, and they have a praetor for each color. And
yeah.
A praetor is...
Essentially the boss.
Essentially the boss for that faction. So there are 5 praetors for each of the 5 colors, and they sort of are at war with each other. Last I heard, Elish Norn, the White Praetor, is pretty much in charge now of all the factions. So there was a war
Ironically,
between
I
each
think
one.
she is just straight up the best one card wise.
Probably.
Like, she is really good.
All of this to say that Phyrexian Unlife really factors in this. It's from the last set in the Scars of Mirrodin block. The set is called New Phyrexia. The idea is that Phyrexia won. Mirrodin has fallen. The Mirians have all but been completed. There's only a very few pockets of resistance left. They've renamed the plane of Mirrodin New Phyrexia.
Yeah.
So, effectively, what Phyrexian Unlife does is give you 10 extra life. It's actually a little bit more than that, depending on how things shake down.
Essentially, yeah.
Which brings me into the rules clarifications. Because all combat damage is dealt simultaneously, if you have 3 life and they attack you with 5 power of creatures, you go to -2. You don't start taking poison counters until the next time you're dealt damage.
Yes. However, if you gain life again.
Or if you gain life again.
Yeah.
No.
If you gain life again, you keep the damage. You keep the poison counters, but it goes back up, and then that happens again.
If you gain... So they take you down to -2. You gain 3 life. Then they hit you again. You drop back down into the negatives.
Yeah.
You don't start taking the poison counters yet.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. They have to hit you when you're at negative.
Yes, but what I'm saying is if you go down to -2 and then you take like 5 more damage, you're at 5 poison counters.
Yes.
If you gain life, you don't lose poison counters.
Right.
You just go back up to 3.
Get your life back.
Yeah. Which is a little bit different than you just gain 10 extra life. 10
Yeah,
extra life.
it's slightly different. It's not exactly 10 extra life, but effectively.
Yeah. In any deck that isn't built to consider consider it like one of the central points, it's essentially just you gain 10 life.
Yeah.
If you draft it, you gain 10 life.
It lets you hold on for an extra 10.
Yeah.
Well, and one very important thing to note is damage causes loss of life. Loss of life is not damage.
So if you lose life, you don't gain poison
If
counters.
you lose life, you don't gain poison
I
counters.
did not think about that.
Yes. Which is very important. Brings me into some of the cards you can use. Dark Prophecy.
That's so...
Dark Prophecy.
Oh, that's nuts.
3 mana
Oh.
for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and you lose a life. This loss of life no longer matters.
Yeah.
You can be at -100 life and you keep losing life so long as no one deals you damage.
This is very similar to... This is a better workaround than, Platinum Empyrean, which says your life total cannot change.
Right.
Which is bad because...
You can't pay life.
Yeah, you can't pay life for anything. For each damage dealt this way, do X. Like, that won't work unless you do it to someone else, but whatever. This, on the other hand, you just, I pay 5 life. I'm in -10 now.
Well, here's the problem. You cannot pay life if your life total is 0 or less.
Oh, but you can lose life.
You can lose life, but you cannot pay it. Unless you pay 0.
You actually need to be able to pay it. So, if it's Phyrexian mana, which is 2 life, or whatever color mana it is, you have to have 2.
Right. You have to have 2 life. You can't... If you have 1 life, you cannot use Phyrexian mana effectively. Because you can't pay 2 life.
Yeah.
You don't have
you can't even do it to kill yourself. Because
Right.
you don't have the 2 mana.
Right.
You have to concede if you want to lose it.
There are much better ways to drop to 0.
Yeah.
I will cover these. I have a deck built around this card. It's fantastic. I love it. So another one to use to just pull the best out of this card is Malira Sylvic Outcast. Malira Sylvic Outcast costs a generic and a green for a 2/2 legendary human scout. Malira's effect is perfect for this. You cannot get poison counters. Creatures you control cannot have -1/-1 counters placed on them. Creatures your opponents control lose infect. Malira is the perfect life insurance policy for Phyrexian Unlife. Even better than Platinum Angel. Well, maybe not better than Platinum Angel. Both of them can die relatively easily. But...
Yeah, well, Malira is a lot more susceptible to just damage.
Right. But Malira keeps the poison counters off, so if they kill her, they have to start with 0 poison counters.
Yeah.
Platinum Angel doesn't keep poison counters off. Mm-hmm. All they have to do is kill Platinum Angel and you die.
Yeah. Yeah. But Platinum Angel prevents your opponent from milling you out.
Yeah.
So if your opponent...
But
Melira
if
doesn't
you...
do that.
If your opponent is playing mill, you've got other problems.
Yes. However, Melira is 2 mana.
Yes.
And
Platinum Angel is 7. Melira and Phyrexian Unlife pair so well together. I actually discovered this when I was at the new Phyrexia pre-release. I drafted both of these cards.
Oh, that's nuts.
I also drafted the third piece of this deck that I built, which is another card I'm going to talk about. Soul Conduit. This card is dope. Soul Conduit is a 6 mana artifact. Mm-hmm. You pay 6 and you tap it. 2 target players exchange life totals.
Yep.
Phyrexian Unlife lets you go down to less than 0 life and doesn't kill you for it. Your opponent might not necessarily have that life insurance policy.
Yep.
So
that is fun. It costs 7. It costs 12 mana to pull off, but
which sort of leads me into the deck that I built.
Yeah.
The deck that I built around these 3 is entirely based around running as fast as you can to 0 and then swapping life totals.
Yep.
So I run lots of mana ramp. I run Cultivate. I run
Rampant Growth.
I run Cultivate. I run Rampant Growth.
Harrow.
I actually don't run Harrow because it requires you to sacrifice a land, and I want to have as many lands on the board as I can.
Yeah, but it still gains you 2 land.
It does gain you 2 land.
It also speeds you up because it's coming untapped.
Yeah, but that's okay. I'm not worried about being fast.
Yeah, still.
I run... Now, this is a casual deck.
That is true.
Because I run 4 copies of Yawgmoth's Bargain. Now, ordinarily, paying life is not the... doesn't work really well with Phyrexian Unlife, but in this deck, it's perfect. So, Yawgmoth's Bargain.
Is that one that, like, instead of getting your draw step, you can pay a life and just draw a card?
Yawgmoth's Bargain costs 4 generic and 2 black. Is a 6 mana enchantment. Skip your draw step. Pay a life, draw a card. Draw, I have 0 life.
Isn't this banned in literally everything?
Banned in everything but Legacy, and it is restricted in Legacy. It is just too good. I run 4.
Of course you do.
Which is why this is a casual deck. I could actually make this a Legacy deck if I pulled out 3 Yawgmoth's Bargains.
Yeah.
I have a couple of life insurance policies in here. Tree of Redemption lets me
swap
my life total with its toughness.
I was thinking of mentioning that earlier.
It's useful.
Yeah.
It basically says if I'm at 20 and I don't want to be at 20, I swap my life total with its toughness and I have a 0-20 defender and 13 life.
Yep.
I run Rites of Flourishing, which I love.
Rites of Flourishing is a fun card. Almost every single green deck I make, since I play casually, I almost always run Rites of Flourishing in it.
Rites of Flourishing, 3 mana, enchantment. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Each player may play an additional land on each of his or her turns. It just helps me ramp that mana, and people aren't going to try and destroy it.
Yeah, because
it hugs them.
Yeah,
it just envelops them in that warm hug of more cards and land.
Yeah, and everyone loves it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll let you do that. I run 4 of these. And then I drop Yawgmoth's Bargain and I stop drawing cards.
Yep.
Rites of Flourishing and Yawgmoth's Bargain is a hilarious combination because your opponent just keeps drawing. That could be a deck in and of itself. You could just accelerate their draw to the point where they draw themselves out and you're not drawing at all. You only draw when you want to.
That could. I mean, there's also things like Omen Machine. That's a different one.
There's a lot of ways to mill your opponent.
Yeah, there's plenty of cards that just say skip your draw step.
Yeah.
Instead, do X. Omen Machine is a fun one.
Many of them are even legal.
Yeah.
So, a couple other cards that work really well with Phyrexian Unlife. Privileged Position. It's just another insurance policy. I don't actually run it in this deck. 5 mana, other permanents you control have hexproof. It just says, nope, you got a board wipe. And even then, you're probably only going to get either the enchantment or the creature. Probably not both.
Yeah.
It's just really useful. Some other fun cards. Things like Boon of Erebos, Reanimate, Dark Confidant. I'm going to talk specifically about Dark Confidant, which is 1 and a black for a 2/1 wizard. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its converted mana cost. and you don't care. Because the loss of life doesn't matter. All of these cards that I just mentioned they do something and you lose life. The loss of life doesn't matter. You get an extra card with no downside, effectively.
Yeah. Fun fact about Dark Confidant. People call him Bob. And the reason for that is because Dark Confidant was, I believe, designed by a Magic Tournament champion, like the world champion at the year it was originally printed, whose name was Bob something.
You can get the most out of these cards that cause you to lose life without having to worry too much about them. Some other fun ones are Vendetta, Devour in Shadow. These are kill spells. Mm-hmm. They kill something and you lose life. Devour in Shadow is 2 black, instant, destroy target creature. It can't be regenerated. You lose life equal to that creature's toughness. Kill anything you want. You lose life. Big deal. You don't care.
You don't care at all. That is interesting. Like, I didn't actually think this card was, like, any good at all. But, like, now that I know, like, oh, yeah, you can still lose life.
Yeah, I love this card.
Like, that is interesting.
That is exactly what this podcast is about. This podcast is all about taking cards that you wouldn't necessarily look at twice and saying, hey, these do have some value.
Yeah.
These have interactions that make the game fun and interesting. So, this brings me to some poor interactions. Infect. Phyrexian Unlife does not save you if your opponent is running an Infect deck. If your opponent is running an Infect deck, well, shame on them.
Yeah, you lose.
Using Phyrexian Unlife against an Infect deck is probably not the best use of your time.
Oh yeah, it's not a good idea. You're just going to get steamrolled because, like, alright, fine.
Like, well, that extra life doesn't make any difference to me.
You just don't care about paying life, but I'm an Infect deck, so you didn't care to begin with.
Right. And that's another thing is, like, paying life with Phyrexian Unlife, it's got limited use. You've only got the 20 life. Yeah, you can gain life, but if you're gaining life, then you don't necessarily need to worry too much about the extra 10.
Yeah.
So, paying life is useful in very specific circumstances, namely the deck that I built, because then you want to get to 0 as fast as you can. So you just want to keep paying as much life as you can. Strangely enough, I don't think that deck runs any Phyrexian mana.
That is strange. You'd think it would run something like Spellskite. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can just keep doing it.
But the deck that I built is white, green, black. Mm-hmm. So, I don't have access to this. Well, I have access to the Spellskites, I guess, because Phyrexian mana.
Phyrexian mana, yeah, no one cares.
So, but I needed to be able to rush to 0 as fast as I can while still having an E-break that I could pull.
Yeah.
So, I took out certain things that used Phyrexian mana.
Mm-hmm.
I think that about wraps it up for Phyrexian Unlife.
Alright, so my card for today is Springjack Shepard. He is printed in Eventide, which is part of the Shadowmoor block, which takes place on the plane of Lorwyn.
There's quite a lot there.
Yeah, like, it's a whole bunch of, like, circular stuff. To the point, well, it's so confusing, I actually thought Shadowmoor was the plane for a while there, until I actually looked deeper into it. And by look deeper, as in you told me this about 20 minutes before we started recording.
Yeah. Shadowmoor is technically the name of the plane after the Great Aurora.
Oh, that is true.
But yeah, it's Lorwyn.
So I was right the whole time.
Effectively.
See, this is why you don't need to correct me.
Well, here's what happened. The Great Aurora was an occurrence that happened every 100 years, turning Shadowmoor into Lorwyn, into Shadowmoor, into Lorwyn.
Oh, that's
It's
cool.
always daytime on Lorwyn. It's always nighttime on Shadowmoor.
That is so cool.
This was set up
It's like
centuries ago by Oona, the Queen of the Fairies. I don't know if that I'm saying her name right.
Oona.
It's Oona. She set this up because that's just the way she wanted it.
Yeah.
The events
because that's how fairies work. They're day and night, summer, winter.
Yeah. So what happened was over the course of the events of the Lorwyn block, Oona was killed by herself. So what happened was the Lorwyn block happened right around the same time as the Mending.
Okay. Okay.
So when the Mending happened, it actually forced the Great Aurora sooner than Oona wanted it.
Oh, okay.
So she created a physical avatar of herself, a mortal avatar of herself, but stayed herself, just in case she would get changed by the Great Aurora. So what the Great Aurora does is it takes all the denizens of Lorwyn and corrupts them into their Shadowmoor counterparts.
Okay.
And then vice versa whenever it comes back around.
Okay.
She is entirely unaffected by this because she causes it. She was afraid that because the Great Aurora was happening and she wasn't causing it, that she would be affected by this. So she created this avatar of herself. Over the course of the Lorwyn Shadowmoor block, her avatar and a band of others kill Una, restoring the normal day-night cycle.
Okay.
So, and then the corruption, to my understanding, the corruption no longer happens.
Okay.
It's just day and night now.
Okay. I guess that's good. But that's actually really cool. I like those, like I assume it's like a year or 100 years, right?
It's 100 years.
Every 100 years at a time, just like some video game stuff happens in which, like, it's nighttime now. Shut up. Everything's evil now.
Yeah.
It's like, I think this is a Banjo-Kazooie level and a Donkey Kong 64 level. It's just that.
Yeah.
You literally press a button and it's nighttime now. Springjack Shepard, who is a 4-drop. He costs 3 colorless and a white mana. He is a 1/2 creature. He is a Kithkin wizard, which I don't care about that. Fun fact, Kithkin are essentially hobbits, but they're not hobbits because that's a copyright infringement. So they just call them Kithkin instead. Oh, also another fun fact, the art is by Thomas Denmark, in case any of you care. So what his ability is...
I think it's important to call out the artists. They do good work.
They do good work. I'm okay with this art. It's no Notion Thief. The guy who did the Notion Thief art, like, it was like Colin Creasy or something like that. That art was amazing. This art is good. I mean, not bad, but it could be better. Anyway, what?
We're going to get this guy listening to this podcast, and he's going to come hunt you down.
Yeah. How dare you? I'm like, it's still good. It's no Notion Thief, though. It's no Goat Napper. That art's pretty fun. Anyway, so what he does is his only ability is Chroma. When Springjack Shepard enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 white goat creature token onto the battlefield for each white mana symbol in mana costs of permanents you control. That was really long, but it essentially is when Springjack Shepard enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 goat token onto the battlefield equal to your devotion to white. So if you have 5 devotion to white, you put in 5 goats. What your devotion to white is the number of white mana symbols amongst permanent use controls. So Springjack Shepard cost 3 and a white. So if you have just him onto the battlefield, you bring in 1 goat. If you have 2 of him onto the battlefield, each of them has 1 white mana symbol in them, so you bring in 2 goats when one of them enters the battlefield, of course.
Chroma and Devotion are actually similar. They both care about mana symbols. Chroma is very specific to the instance in which Chroma is mentioned.
Yeah, it's being used. A lot of it references... It's essentially for your devotion to whatever color in this zone or for this thing. So, like, there's, like, some cards that are like, this card or target creature gets +X+X, where X is the number of white mana symbols in that one card's mana cost.
Yeah.
So, like, it's very
At which point you
specific.
can't call it Devotion anymore.
Yeah, like...
It's Chroma. It has a different name for a reason.
Yeah, like, Chroma is just it is a less mechanically sound keyword. It's kind of like the recent...
Well, it's like Metalcraft or Delirium. It's different for every card that has it.
It's like an activation requirement and really a keyword.
Yeah.
But even then, it's kind of like, what's the Delirium? It's like Delirium is what I was thinking of. Like it's a very poorly like worded. It's a keyword that doesn't need to be a keyword. Is when he enters the battlefield, you put X goat tokens onto the battlefield, where X is equal to your devotion to white. So the reason I run so when I seen 0/1 goats and how terrible they were, my immediate thought was, I need to make a deck around them. So this is what I did. I found that there was a card. There are 3 cards in Magic that make goat tokens multiple times, or at least
that make goat tokens.
Yes, those are Springjack Shepard, the one I'm talking about now, Springjack Pasture, which is a land that I'll get into later, and your favorite Trading Post.
I wouldn't call it my favorite. I just like it because it makes goats.
Your favorite of the 3 cards that make goats. The one that you
Actually,
like.
No. Springjack Shepard is my favorite of the 3 that make goats. I just acknowledge the use
I acknowledge that
Post.
Trading Post is there and it has its perks, but it is nowhere near as abusable as Springjack Shepard.
That is true. I will acknowledge that.
And there's like,
It's still a viable card. If you're going to run goats, you may as well have everything that makes a goat.
Yes. Yeah, like Trading Post has its perks. Like, you don't run it because it makes goats unless you're
playing a goat
sarcastically.
deck.
Even then, like, there's so many better cards you could play, things that draw you cards, or things that flicker Springjack Shepard and make more goats. You're like, it's not worth the 4 mana. If it was 1 mana, I would run that in a heartbeat.
But 4 mana is just 2 creatures and Ashnod's Altar.
Yeah, but that's 3. That's a 3-for-1. Do you not know
But
how value
goats are
works?
tokens.
That is true.
You don't... Tokens are not value.
Yeah, but... Yeah, I see your point, but I actually don't run Ashnod's Altar. And this is why. Because it runs colorless mana. And I actually have plenty of mana because of Springjack Pasture. As I was saying, so you play Springjack Shepard, and you get some amount of 0/1 goats, depending on how many white mana symbols you have. So obviously the first thought is, okay, you want to get as many white mana symbols as you can as possible. Many ways to do that. You can run things that have like double white. The Silver Knight was one of the ones I had because it was just double white and he was a 2/2 first strike. Whatever. And you just run things that have white mana symbols. One of them is like O-Ring, Soul's Attendant, or Soul Warden.
Soul's Attendant, Soul Warden.
Oh, they're the same.
The Soul
they do the
Sisters.
Same. Yeah, they do the same thing. So you run a playset of those or both, and they're cost 1 and they just gain you life whenever a creature enters the battlefield.
Because you need 8 creatures that gain you life whenever a creature enters the battlefield.
Yep. The best way to abuse this is just focus on entering the battlefield. Make things enter the battlefield, do things when things enter the battlefield. One of the ways you do that is with like Flicker Wisp or Mist Meadow Witch. What Flicker Wisp does is he costs 2 white and 1 generic mana. So that's 2 more chromos. If you have him on the battlefield already and you bring a Springjack Shepard, that's 3 goats. Value. He's a 3/1 flyer, so he's actually pretty powerful just as a body.
He's got a decent body on him.
Yeah, and he flies, so he can swing in for damage here and there, and he can block a flyer. Because once he enters the battlefield, his job is done.
Right.
What he does is when he enters the battlefield, exile a target permanent, return it onto the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. That's an important ability because almost half the cards that I'm about to talk to do something similar to that. So I'm going to call that flickering. Something is exiled and it returns to the battlefield at the end of turn or
immediately.
Or immediately. Yeah, I'm going to call that flickering. I think a lot of people call it blink.
Blinking, cloud shift, flicker. I usually call it flickering.
Yeah, I call it flickering because of Flicker Wisp.
But yeah, there's a few different names for it.
Yeah. So when I made this deck, I'm like, yeah, Flicker Wisp. And my favorite one, because it's a little bit more end game, is called Mist Meadow Witch, who is a 1/1 for 2, a hybrid blue-white mana. The deck I actually made was blue-white for various reasons, even though I think most of the blue was unnecessary. Most of it was like hybrid mana.
Right.
But Mist Meadow's Mist Meadow's ability requires blue. She says, pay a white, a blue, and 2 generic mana. Flicker something. Now, you can, with Mist Meadow Witch, it's important to note that you can flicker anyone's creature, including your opponent's.
We should read it.
Yeah.
Mist Meadow Witch is 1 generic and 1 hybrid white-blue. Mm-hmm. Can be paid with either a white or a blue. For a 1/1 Kithkin Wizard.
Oh yeah, I actually never noticed that.
So, you pay 2 generic, a white, and a blue. You exile target creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Anybody's creature.
Yep. Remember there was a time where you had like something with like Devour on it, and you ate. It was like Devour X, and you ate 30 Saprolings. And so it came in the battlefield as like a 280. You're like, what are you going to do now? And I'm like, I get rid of it with Flicker Wisp. It comes back as a 0/0 and dies. You were mad. I do remember that.
Oh,
it wasn't like I was tapped.
It was a solid play.
I had no cards in hand. You thought you were safe. And I'm like, oh, he doesn't know. He didn't read it. Oh, it's going to be so good.
That's what you get for not paying attention.
Yep, it was great. So yeah, Mist Meadow Witch, the reason, and you don't have to tap for that, so you can just keep repeating it as long as you have mana. And you're thinking like, wow, that's a lot of mana to actually do. It's 4 mana to bring back, what's his name at the end of turn?
Springjack Shepard?
Yep. Fun fact, though, there's this little card that I mentioned earlier called Springjack Pasture, which is a land that you can tap to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. Woo! Or you can pay 4 mana, tap it, and put a goat onto the battlefield.
That's almost as useless as Vitu-Ghazi the City Tree.
Yeah, it's not very good. But Its last ability is the important one. It says tap, sacrifice X goats, add X mana to your mana pool of one color.
Of any one color.
Any one color, that's kind of important. You gain X life. What you want to do is you want to keep bringing in goats with Springjack Pasture, Springjack Shepard, sacrifice the goats to make mana, use Misto Meadow Witch to get rid of Springjack Shepard to come back to bring in more goats. Obviously, you need about 4 to start gaining. But if you have just Shepard and just like Miss Meadow Witch onto the battlefield,
2 goats.
That's 2 goats.
If you have a Flicker Wisp, that's 4 goats.
Yeah.
You break even.
Yeah. However, here's the thing that get interesting. You can do that on like each person's turn. So what you do, like one thing you could do is they come back at the end of turn.
Yeah.
So like someone's like, all right, I wrath. Oh, well, I use Miss Meadow Witch to get rid of. I sacrifice all my goats because they're all going to die anyway. And I've done this like many times. I sacrifice like 10 goats. And like you gain 10 life whenever you sacrifice 10 goats because you just gain life whenever you do that because it's also really good. And you're like, okay, use Miss Meadow Witch to get rid of Miss Meadow Witch herself, Flicker Wisp, and Springjack Shepard until end of turn.
You have to get rid of Miss Meadow Witch last.
No, because they can come back in at your choosing.
If you get rid of Miss Meadow Witch first...
And the abilities are still on the stack, so it doesn't matter. Once the abilities are on the stack. I mean, if you wait for it to resolve and Miss Meadow is gone, you can't activate it again. But
yeah,
like,
if you activate her abilities in response to one another, you're fine. But if you activate her ability and then resolve it... Whoops.
Yeah, like that. Then you're done goof. But like now you just like you activate her 3 times, get rid of Springjack, Flicker Wisp, and Miss Meadow Witch. And like, yeah, Wrath, everything's dead. And then you're like, okay, they all come back. And their abilities go in this order. Miss Meadow Witch first. Now they all enter the battlefield at the same time.
They all enter the battlefield at the same time.
Yes.
You get to pick what order they go on the stack.
Yes. And you want them to resolve in this order. You want them to resolve in Springjack Shepard, then Flicker Wisp. Because both of them are into the battlefield triggers.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because Springjack Shepard will go off first. It'll go, okay, 4 Chroma, 1 for Miss Meadow, 1 for Springjack, 2 for Flicker Wisp, 4 goats. Flicker Wisp will activate and resolve, getting rid of Springjack Shepard. And then if it's like a multiplayer game, it's like someone else's turn, Springjack Shepard will come back at the end of their turn, putting in 4 more goats.
I'm a fan of using Miss Meadow Witch to exile Flicker Wisp, and then just wait.
Yeah.
And then at the end of your turn, Flicker Wisp comes back, and then your Springjack Shepard is safe until the end of your opponent's turn.
Yep, I do that. I've done that quite a bit. It is so interesting to just abuse things coming back at the end of their turn.
Beatable flicker mechanics are fun to abuse.
Oh, yeah. Also, fun fact, your opponent has to pass priority before going to their end step. So what you would do is just like, okay... And if they're like, all right, play a land, move to combat, swing, it's like, meh, whatever. And then they're like, all right, I end my turn. It's like, okay, hold on. When you pass priority to move to end step, because they have to do that, then you activate like Flicker Wisp or Miss Meadow Witch or something to exile something until end of turn. And then it comes back when it actually ends their turn.
Priority is tricky to get a hold of.
Yeah. So yeah, this deck is the deck that I made is essentially Springjack Pasture, Springjack Shepard, and just flickering spells. So many flickering spells, and just things that have white mana costs, like Flicker Wisps, Grand Abolisher. Who has special abilities, but the important part about the Grand Abolisher is that he has 2 white mana in his mana cost.
He's actually incredibly useful in this deck.
He is really good. He's one of those cards I mentioned earlier that I don't like because he's really good, but doesn't fit the flavor.
Yeah.
He prevents people from like instant speed countering my things, really. I also ran a ring. Fun fact, I think it's Venzer, exiles permanents.
I believe so. Cool. So, Fiend Hunter also works really well in this deck because it's got 2 white mana symbols. When it comes into play, you may exile another target creature. When Fiend Hunter leaves play, you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control. Mm-hmm. So you can Fiend Hunter, get rid of something that's problematic, or get rid of a Springjack Shepard. Flicker Fiend Hunter, whatever was exiled comes back. It comes back into play. You get to pick something new.
Yep.
So you can spot remove things for as long as you need to.
Here's the big problem with Fiend Hunter, though.
It's a 1/3 and not a very good beat stick.
That's true. Not really. His ability is actually kind of busted. And I mean busted as in it doesn't quite work. And this is what happens. So Fiend Hunter enters the battlefield, and let's say he targets. If you don't want to target your own thing, this is why. Let's say I'm going to target my opponent's just 5/5 dragon. Like, all right, Fiend Hunter comes in. His ability triggers targeting the dragon. Then your opponent's like, all right, in response to that ability, I kill it. Doomblade, Lightning Bolt, whatever. It's dead. It leaves the battlefield. His ability hasn't resolved yet to exile something. The leaves the battlefield trigger activates, is put on the stack. It resolves first.
And does nothing.
Does nothing because it hasn't exiled it yet.
Right.
But the ability to exile it is still in the stack. It'll resolve and you'll permanently exile that creature. Which is good on my opponent's stuff.
Well, here's what
But if I do it on my own Springjack Shepard,
it functions in very much the same way as Detention Sphere. So, if you really want to get rid of something your opponent controls, if it's really problematic and you want to maintain use of your Fiend Hunter, you target that creature. Its first ability triggers, you pick your opponent's Ulamog, because that's a problem.
Yeah, you can exile.
And then you Mist Meadow Witch. Exile your own Fiend Hunter.
Yep.
Fiend Hunter left the battlefield. Ulamog has not yet been exiled. Ulamog is not returned to the battlefield. Fiend Hunter's first ability resolves. Ulamog is exiled. And then Fiend Hunter comes back in, and you can exile your Springjack Shepard.
Yep. Yes, it works. It works really well to exile my opponent's stuff, but this deck isn't about... The deck that I made, the reason I didn't run Fiend Hunter was because I wasn't about exiling my opponent's stuff. Yeah, I used it here and there to prevent them from killing me, but like, if I was going hard on that Fiend Hunter Mist Meadow Witch plan, I would be going a little too hard on that. Like, it'd be a little too much focused on that and not enough on the goats.
Right.
And I had to go goats all the time.
No, that's fair. That's a perfectly legitimate decision to make when you're building a deck.
Yeah. Well, it's just like I didn't run it. That is why.
It doesn't change my statement. It's a perfectly legitimate decision to make when building a deck.
Yes.
If you're building a deck based on flavor, it is very important to stick to that flavor. Well, it also
doesn't quite work in the deck because it runs the risk of them instant speed killing Fiend Hunter and exiling my... You
can exile the target of Fiend Hunter's ability before the ability resolves, and then the ability fizzles and your Springjack Shepard comes back.
That is true.
You also have... It just requires mana. It's a very mana-intensive process.
Yeah.
But you can protect your cards from being perma-exiled.
That is true, but it still runs a very, very scary risk of it being permanently exiled. Everything else I have in the deck is safe. It always comes back.
Yes.
Always.
It is a risk, and it's very mana-intensive to avert that risk.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what Fiend Hunter done. He's really good. Anyway, so you do all this work to bring in goats, about 1 billion goats. One of my favorite ways to bring in goats to flicker in Springjack Shepard is one of my favorite planeswalkers, Venzer. Costs 5, 3 generic, a white and a blue. His +2 is exile target permanent you control, which is actually very important. Return to the battlefield at the end of turn. The reason permanent is kind of important is because you can do things like if you already exiled Springjack Shepard with a Flicker Wisp or something, you can exile O-Ring.
You can exile your land, and it comes back untapped.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention that one, but O-Ring, get rid of O-Ring, bring it back to get rid of that thing, etc., etc. You can do it to a bunch of things, but it's permanent, so it's very, very useful.
It's versatile. It's incredibly versatile.
One of my favorites to do is Flicker Wisp, because no one cares about Flicker Wisp once it's already done its thing. You get rid of Flicker Wisp.
Yeah.
So when at the end of turn, Springjack Shepard comes back, and Flicker Wisp comes back. Use Flicker Wisp to get rid of Springjack again.
And then he's safe for your opponent's turn.
Yeah. Fun fact, you can also... I think you can use Flicker Wisp to get rid of Flicker Wisp. So if you have one opponent that you know is going to, sorcery speed, kill everything...
Right.
You can just bounce... You cycle Flicker Wisp until that guy's turn. Anyway, so, you're running all these Flickers. You're running things like Soul's Attendant to gain life every time something enters the battlefield, which is a lot.
You're going to have a lot of that.
So many times. You're getting life from Springjack Pasture. You gain a bunch of life with this deck, assuming your opponents just don't kill you.
Which is entirely possible.
It is very possible. If you're playing casual, if you're playing this deck, you're probably playing casual. It's not competitive. Most likely you want to play multiplayer, because they're it's goats. They're 0/1 goats. What are they going to do with 0/1 goats? I'll tell you what you're going to do with 0-1 goats. So after about turn 30, you actually get like a whole bunch of goats by like turn 5. Like yeah. I've gotten there. You run. There are 3 main cards that I suggest you run. The quickest and easiest, and probably the best one, is Intangible Virtue, which is just a 2-drop enchantment, 1 white, 1 colorless. Which says creature tokens you control get +1/+1 and have vigilance. So now instead of 0-1 goats, you have 1-2 goats with vigilance.
1-2 vigilant goats.
Yes.
These are the most watchful goats.
Yes, so you have a bunch of goats.
At that point, you don't need a shepherd anymore.
Yeah, they are vigilant on their own. And so, like, eventually, once you have, like, 40 goats, which, trust me, you'll get there. You're like, all right, you have 20 life and, like, 5 blockers. I swing with 25 blockers, or 25 goats. They're 1/1s. You eat 5 of them, but then you're dead. Whatever. Oh, fun fact. I also instant speed sacrifice those goats you were going to eat for mana. And life. Use them to make more goats. I love goats. Goats is like mana and life, where it's a renewable resource in this deck. That one's probably the best one, like purely competitive, because it gives you just enough to get there. Another one that I really like is Cathar's Crusade. If you really just want to explode, it is 5 mana. It costs 3 colorless and 2 white, so that adds 2 more to your Chrome account. And it says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter, sorry, a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So if you like flicker in Springjack Shepard for 4 goats, every single goat and Springjack Shepard counts towards that. So every single creature you control, including the 5 that just came in, will get 5 +1/+1 counters on them.
Springjack Shepard comes into play, puts a +1/+1 counter on itself. Nothing else exists. Its ability triggers.
It depends on, you can stack the abilities, because it's enter the battlefield triggers. What'll happen is, he'll enter the battlefield, and then once he enters the battlefield, both his ability and Cathar's Crusade will trigger and get put on the stack, whichever order you want.
You put Cathar's Crusade on the stack first. Springjack Shepard's on the stack second.
Exactly. So Springjack resolves first, putting more goats.
Happen. Goats come into play. Cathar's Crusade goes on the stack on top of Cathar's Crusade.
Yep.
Both resolve. Counters.
Yeah, you put 4 on everything, and then put 1 on everything. So if you already have 10 goats, and then 5 more goats enter the battlefield, all of a sudden, those 10-0-1 goats are now 5-6 goats. And trust me, you'll have more than just 10 goats. You have no idea how quickly this deck will just make more goats. It is nuts. And my personal favorite way to end a game with, once you effectively have like 40 goats, is probably one of the most fun cards I've ever played. Like, in a deck. The card is fun itself, but in this deck, just the sheer astonishment people get when they see you play it, and the way you play it, is a little card called Dragon Shift. It is a 3-drop instant that costs 1, a blue, and a red. Now, I know what you're thinking. Red? I thought the deck was blue-white. It is. But keep in mind that Springjack Pasture can tap for any color of mana.
So you sacrifice goats for any color of mana. One color. Any one color.
Any one color. That's
but
important.
You've already got blue in land.
Yes. So, that is how you get the red, which is actually kind of important. But what it says is, until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a 4/4 blue and red dragon, loses all abilities, and gains flying.
Your goats don't have abilities.
Nope. Doesn't matter. They'd be dragons now. But yes, it only does 1, but it has Overload. For 3 colorless, 2 blue, and 2 red, so 7 total mana, which you'll get to by the time you're wanting to run this. Sacrifice 7 of your 40 million goats.
For 7 red mana.
Yeah, you'd have to sacrifice.
You sacrifice 5 goats for red mana, and then you tap 2 blue lands.
Exactly. And now all of your goats are dragon goats, and you swing at everyone.
The first time you played this deck against me, I was not expecting this.
Oh, no one does.
I'm like, oh, goats. Goats are fun. I don't even remember what deck I was playing. But I'm like, okay, well...
Probably Saprolings.
It quite possibly was. I'm like, Oh, yeah, okay, goats. I can keep up with this. This is easy.
Yeah,
I'm making just as many tokens as you are.
Yeah, because you're like, I have 1/1 saplings, you have 0/1 goats. I'm not losing anything. And I'm like, oh, you.
And then suddenly dragons happened.
Just dragon goats.
And I lost. And I was left scratching my head going, where did the dragons come from? Where did the dragons go? Why am I surrounded by goats?
Just goats by the millions. So, I should probably, like, post this deck. I love this deck. This deck was so fun, where I would just make goats. That was the whole point of the deck. I just wanted to make more goats. And it's actually probably the most fun deck I've ever made. Like, I made a bunch of fun decks. Like, I made my draw deck. It's fun for me, but, like, everyone loves my goat deck.
It's fun to play against.
Yeah.
There are decks that are fun to play for you and nobody else.
Yeah.
And then there are decks that are fun for everybody.
Yep. It's more fun for the guy playing the goat deck than anyone else, but like this is the deck that pretty much invented my love for flickering cards.
Yeah.
Just making things enter the battlefield. Obviously, the number one counter to this deck, straight off the bat, is Torpor Orb, which just says that creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. So just nothing happens. Your creature enters the battlefield. Okay. Yeah, but when it enters battlefield, it gets goats. No, it doesn't.
No.
It just doesn't.
Not anymore. There are a couple of branches off this deck. If you want to take it on a slightly different path, add green mana.
Yeah.
Add green mana.
You could
then
run...
you have access to Rune of the Hidden Realms. You have access to Parallel Lives. You have access to Doubling Season.
Yep.
All goats all the time.
All day, every day.
So, Rune is a card that I was introduced to. I didn't know it existed until I started listening to the Command Zone podcast.
Ironically, like this is the number one card on my list of cards to make commander decks with. Because Bant is my tricolor. Like that's my favorite collection of 3 colors.
I'm Grixis.
Rune is really cool. But yeah, if you want to splash green, you can get things like Rites of Flourishing.
Parallel Lives is really great if you're not running Cathar's Crusade, because you don't need the full-blown force of Doubling Season.
Yeah.
If you're running Cathar's Crusade and you want to splurge the $40 per Doubling Season...
Yeah.
If you want to splurge on the Doubling Season and you're running Cathar's Crusade, then Doubling Season might be worth it.
Yeah.
If you're not running Cathar's Crusade and you want to splash in the green to double up on your tokens... Parallel Lives is perfect for this deck. It's one of the rare occasions in which I would say run Parallel Lives over Doubling Season. It's budget relatively. Actually,
cheaper.
I think it's really budget.
Oh yeah, it's
a mana cheaper.
It's $1. It is probably a $1 rare because it is sought after as a
cheap replacement to Doubling
It's
Season.
also just a casual fun card.
Yeah.
It's not like OP, but like every sapling deck in the world has a Parallel Lives in it because it's good.
If you want to branch out into green, I think you can get a lot of utility. So yeah,
I think that's really all I have about Springjack Shepard. And I didn't really talk about Springjack Shepard because he's boring. I talked about goats because that's fun.
There are some cards that I think we'll pick because they're really just interesting on their own. Like, Phyrexian Unlife is really interesting on its own. There are other cards that we'll pick because they work really well with other stuff.
Yeah.
Like Ashnod's Altar.
But, yes, this deck is fun. It brings in goats. If you want to make a deck about goats and you want people to look at you like you're an idiot for first half of a game, and then all of a sudden they can't kill you, or all of a sudden all your goats turn into dragons, run this deck. It is fun. Oh, it is so fun. Thank you for listening to Pick a Card, Any Card. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or card suggestions, you can email us at
pacac.cast@gmail.com.
Or if you are listening to this on YouTube, you can leave them in the comments below. Thank you. Click stop so I can stop talking and stand up. A little bit less boring, but I'm going to talk a lot about
Did you
the
just
deck.
say a little less boring?
A little less awesome. Sorry. It makes goats.